Hello, my friend. Welcome to my channel. Washington was reeling. On the 13th day of the government shutdown, poor families were quietly staring down their medical notices. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife, as Congress remained deadlocked in endless political infighting. The delay in renewing the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, subsidies was pushing over 24 million Americans to the brink. The government was closed, there was no budget, and there was no solution. And meanwhile, in South Florida, President Donald Trump was casually driving a golf cart with his granddaughter at his Mar-a-Lago club, smiling as he shouted to his wealthy friends, "Your taxes are coming down." That sentence was a dagger, severing the last fragile thread of faith in the American political system. The soul of the nation was wounded, yet its leader was laughing on a golf course. The global media reacted furiously. Day 13 of the shutdown. Trump plays, America waits. Millions at risk. But the president stays on the golf course. But it wasn't just the international press. Within Washington, dissent within the Democratic Party began to escalate, and the tension reached a boiling point when Jasmine Crockett, the young Congresswoman from Texas, decided to stand up as a fighter from within her own party. Jasmine Crockett did not hesitate to criticize Republicans and a faction of Democrats she deemed not brave enough to stand up for the people. In a live interview on MSNBC, her voice was powerful. "I cannot stand by and watch the government shut down, while my constituents bear the brunt of the failure of politicians. 24 million people could lose their insurance, and you all continue to argue over a budget." Jasmine Crockett didn't just condemn the political battle. She condemned those who had forgotten that with every passing day, a life is lost. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican congresswoman, held a completely opposite view. She stood before a crowd with a large binder, slamming it on the dais as she declared, "We cannot keep pouring money into a failed healthcare system. The American people cannot continue to pay the price for the failures of Obamacare. This is the time for real reform." Applause erupted from the Republican side, but a wave of protest rose from the Democrats. Those who opposed Jasmine Crockett, like Greene, could not feel the devastating cost that health insurance policies imposed on the poor. Every time Greene spoke, Jasmine Crockett rose to defend the lives of the voiceless. "What is reality?" Jasmine retorted at a press conference on Capitol Hill. "Reality is when I have to stand before mothers, fathers, and the sick elderly and tell them the government cannot help them. That is when we must look at ourselves. Can you look in the mirror and say we did the right thing?" Her words were a slap in the face to the White House and to all the Republicans, blaming each other for their inability to solve the crisis. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just fighting for the survival of the ACA. She was fighting for the very soul of a nation that was increasingly losing its ability to see the value of human beings, replaced by a system dominated by political interests. Her words struck at the guilt her Democratic colleagues had to confront. But in truth, not everyone stood with her. Greene's narrative began to gain traction as the media relentlessly repeated her calls for reform, not continued ACA subsidies, and the image of Trump on the golf course only highlighted the stark difference in values between the two sides. This conflict didn't just create fierce political debates, it posed a larger question. Is the American political system still strong enough to protect its most vulnerable? When power and personal interests prevail, the people who need healthcare subsidies are left behind. Outside the Capitol, the ACA crisis intensified. All eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett as she fought relentlessly on television, calling on the Democratic Party to abandon compromise and stand with the people. But while she spoke up for millions of struggling Americans, Marjorie Taylor Greene, along with other Republicans, continued to argue that welfare for the poor only created a wasteful system. In a closed-door White House meeting, Trump's advisors began to strategize how to leverage the situation. A close aide revealed, "This is an opportunity for Trump to show his strength by standing on his tax victory. Congress is deadlocked, and the people will see who is really bringing them change." Jasmine Crockett continued to speak out. At a town hall in Texas, she called for a fight for life, not a political battle. We are facing a humanitarian crisis, not just a partisan showdown. If we cannot protect the vulnerable at a time like this, what do we have to be proud of? Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene kept pressuring the Democrats. You cannot keep making financial decisions that ignore reality, she said on Fox News. We are doing the right thing to save America from a socialist welfare system. Though Jasmine continued to gain media support, behind the scenes, budget negotiations never stopped. Progressives found themselves fighting against a moral decay within their own party, while Republicans held firm, ACA subsidies only with drastic reforms. Marjorie Taylor Greene relentlessly attacked Jasmine Crockett. To her supporters, she said, Jasmine is playing politics with emotion. We have to face reality, not just appease those who exploit public sentiment. Those words only hardened Crockett's resolve. We cannot just sit back and let the poor pay the price for policy failures. The third week of the shutdown began like a recurring nightmare. Thousands of Americans took to the streets with handwritten signs, "My life is not your politics." In community hospitals, nurses cried as they were forced to turn away patients because their medication budgets had run out. In Florida, President Trump appeared at a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. Behind him were tables draped in white linen, expensive glasses of wine, and applause that seemed to come from another universe. Before hundreds of wealthy business owners, he said with a confident smile, "The economy is strong, don't let the press scare you, they just want me to fail. But America is winning," the crowd roared. Live television cut to a shot of him raising his glass in a toast. And in Washington, the screen was split. On the left, the president's smile. On the right, the tears of a patient who had lost their insurance. The irony was devastating when a nation measures its strength by the height of a champagne flute, not by the number of people it saves. At the same time, in Congress, Jasmine Crockett entered an emergency session. As the Speaker of the House banged the gavel, she rose, her voice echoing through the silent chamber. We let a child die in a hospital because you were counting budgets. We let a mother weep at a bedside because we wanted to win an argument. She paused, taking a deep breath. If this is the greatness you speak of, then I want no part of it. Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat, her voice sharp. You're playing politics with emotion, Crockett. The people need discipline, not tears. Jasmine looked directly at her. No, Mrs. Greene. The people need medicine, not lectures. Applause thundered from the Democratic benches, drowning out the Republican protests. The Speaker was forced to call a recess. But that exchange had been broadcast live across the country. Within hours, it became the most watched video in modern American political history. Outside the Capitol, thousands gathered with signs, "We stand with Jasmine." They weren't activists. They were nurses, factory workers, retirees, the people the government had forgotten. A man from West Virginia said, "She speaks for us. We don't need politics. We need to live." Behind the scenes, some Republican advisors began to worry. One whispered to Marjorie Greene, "If she keeps talking like that, we're going to lose control of the narrative." Greene replied, "Don't worry. Emotion doesn't replace power." But in that very statement, she failed to realize that power was losing its soul. Meanwhile, Trump continued to exploit the situation. He posted a video intercutting clips of Jasmine's speech with his own sneering commentary. She cries, I work. She talks, I act. That's the difference between a winner and a loser. The video ended with the slogan, America wins again. And on the same day, the Dow Jones ticked up slightly, while desperation in poor neighborhoods surged. As the stock market recovered, humanity collapsed. Rural hospitals closed as their budgets ran dry. Nonprofits pleaded for help. And within the Democratic Party, the schism widened. One faction wanted to compromise to save the budget, while the other, led by Jasmine, wanted to fight to save the people. A veteran congressman sighed. If we don't find a common voice, we will no longer be the party of the people. The next morning, Congress voted on a temporary bill to extend ACA subsidies for 60 days. After hours of struggle, Jasmine's proposal passed. When the results appeared, she stood still, her hands clenched. No one clapped, no one cheered, there was only silence. Because everyone knew this wasn't a victory, but a single gasp of air in a death rattle. That evening, Trump held a victory party at Mar-a-Lago. A Politico reporter described the scene. Chandeliers sparkled, champagne flowed like a river. On a large screen the words appeared, "Shutdown over, America back in business." But outside the gates, a group of protesters still stood, holding signs. "We are not your business." One of them told a reporter, "The government may have reopened, but the heart of America is still closed." From Europe to Asia, international media called it America's moral awakening. Marjorie Taylor Greene appeared on Fox, her voice bitter. "She won a temporary victory, but the economy will collapse. And then they'll be begging us to come back." But even in her threats, she knew the tide of public opinion had turned. When faith is awakened, power is no longer safe. 3 weeks later, Congress passed a formal budget, fully restoring the ACA subsidies. The final news report of the day read, "Millions of Americans breathe a sigh of relief." But American politics has never been more divided. Analysts call it the price of compassion, a small victory, paid for with a full exposure of the truth. Jasmine Crockett walked out of Congress into the night. A cold wind blew through her messy hair. She looked up at the Capitol dome, bathed in a pale yellow light. A reporter asked, "Do you think you won?" She shook her head softly. "No one wins a war over conscience. But at least today, America remembered that we once had a heart." While other politicians talked about power, she talked about life. While others counted votes, she counted the heartbeats of a nation. And perhaps that is what made the world watch Washington in silence that night, where one small woman made the entire system bow to its conscience. The ACA fight was just a small slice of a larger problem. Can a democracy survive if it loses its compassion? Tonight, the budget numbers may change, the speeches may be forgotten, but the image of Jasmine Crockett daring to confront an entire system to protect a child without health insurance will remain as a reminder: never let politics forget the people. If you believe that compassion is true strength, share this video. If you believe the truth must be spoken, even when power doesn't want to hear it, leave a comment. And if you want to keep seeing the stories the media won't tell, subscribe to this channel. We don't just report the news, we decipher power, expose paradoxes, and ask the big questions the world is avoiding. Who truly shapes America's soul?